ジャギ様から盗み取った北斗神拳、北斗を味合わせてやるわ。
Hello everybody, welcome to the video. My name is Miru and today we're once again looking at some Holy Paladin gameplay, this time around on the Temple of the Jade Serpent, a dungeon from Mists of Pandaria that's now coming in the Season 1 dungeon rotation for Mythic Plus. So we will be playing a lot of this dungeon. You will basically get very acquainted with it, I'm sure you will, and I do believe it's one of the better ones. I quite enjoyed it, but we will be running through it, we'll be commenting on it, and we'll be talking about whatever I feel that this dungeon has in store for us. But we are once again running a melee build for Holy Paladin. I do believe there's really no chance, I mean there might be one, but I think that's very slim that we might be casting a Mythic Plus. It is almost certain that we will be running melee builds, so we are of course running one of those. Small tweaks between this build and the one we run for the previous video. If you haven't seen that one, go ahead and watch that one. And yep, we will be explaining that in a moment as well. But yeah, we will be just running through the dungeon, and as we get to the bosses and such, we'll have a little bit of a commentary of what I think about it, and just talk about Holy Paladin as we're approaching the release of Dragonflight. I'm sure you guys are excited for it. I'm sure I'm. And yeah, let's now look at the build. So here's the build we're running. The biggest difference between this build and the one we ran on the previous dungeon from the previous video is that here we are running with Ladder the Martyr, so we have access to this panic button that we don't really want to rely on, but it comes really handy whenever we really need it. So in order to be able to get it, we dropped Save Vital Light, which didn't really do too much on the previous dungeon. The throughput from it was not the greatest, and we also dropped Unwavering Spirit, which I don't really know if it's something you can afford to drop, because having more Aura Masteries is always very nice, but it's not really something you could get that much value if it's not the right dungeon for it. Also, we are not running Second Sunrise or the increased range from Light of Dawn. We're not really using too much Light of Dawn, as we're going to be mentioning through this dungeon, and we are not picking Veneration as well, because we are not really casting, so we don't get that much benefit out of it. We just get it out of the judgments. We could also be switching around these talents, Moment of Compassion from the Spending Light, so we could get some splash from consuming our Divine Favor buff with those Holy Lights, something that I think would be good. And also we're running with the increased healing and damage done from Holy Shock. Now on the left side of the tree, nothing too interesting. We're getting our basics, we're getting our throughput, more damage, more healing. Also getting Off Dusk Undone, always some free stuff right there. And we are running with Aspirations of Divinity. Since it's a melee build, we're going to be using Crusader Strike, so we get a benefit out of that. We are not picking Judgment of Light, instead we're going to be picking Golden Path, and then we just pick the basics, our kick, our 1 minute sack. We could also opt to switch some things here, like dropping the Disease spell, or also dropping Freedom, but that's really about it. So that was the build. Just to show, there was not that many changes, but we now have access to some things that might be quite handy. I do quite like having access to at least Light of the Martyr, even though it's not really something you should be using. It's always good to have access to it when you really need it. And in this dungeon, where there might be some scenarios where you kind of really need maybe a little bit of an extra healing, because there's quite some damage, especially in these first couple trash packs before the first boss. Every single one of these corrupted living waters, they do a lot of damage. These are gonna be quite a nightmare on fortified and high keys. They do a lot of AoE damage, so you're going to be stacking a lot of bursts and avoidance as always, because you cannot really deal with this in any other way. But yeah, they do a lot of AoE damage, and then you have a bunch of debuffs that are applied. Mass Dispel could potentially come in really handy here, but we'll see. We're definitely not able to do that, so that's once again something we are behind in. But we have access to a kick, so that's always going to be coming in handy, especially in this part coming up. There's going to be some individuals, those Fallen Water Speakers, just like this one. They do have a cast that if you do not interrupt the tidal burst, they will do a lot of AoE damage like that. So there is once again, quite some casts that are pretty mandatory to be interrupted, but you always want to have everything interrupted if possible, and us having a kick contributes to that a lot. A priest, for example, wouldn't really be able to do that, but yeah. A lot of the damage from this first part is, or pretty much all the damage is coming from those corrupted living waters. You just gotta deal with the big AoE, and a good tool we have for that is, of course, Divine Toll. It's coming in really handy whenever we see big AoE damage scenarios. We just are able to deal with that in a much nicer way than before. But before, we also were kind of able to do that as well if we were able to, a little bit of chaos going on right here with the kicks and not happening and such, but we're already able to deal with big AoE scenarios with a Necrolord Hammer, but we were kind of reliant on positioning, and that's really not always the case. But regardless, it's always nice to be able to have access to Divine Toll. I can't stress enough how good and how nice it is to have a kick. It's just allowing us to be much more in control of everything during the fight, being able to contribute to whatever we think might be a bit of a fuck up. But regardless, yep, you better get ready to be kicking some stuff, because for Mythic Plus it's pretty much going to be of course it's gonna be mandatory. I mean, there's no way you would never really be picking a kick. Even if you're a healer, you should be kicking. It's just gonna make things a lot smoother. But yeah, a lot of damage happening on this first part. I did this dungeon a bunch of times. I did it, I don't know, like 4 or 5 times. And a lot of them were just over before we got to the first boss because of those couple elementals. They are quite rough to deal with. And as I mentioned, if the kicks go through from the other guys, you just have a double burst and people die immediately. So yeah, people are really eager to leave keys in the beta. Apparently, if it doesn't really go smoothly, nobody really wants to bother because, you know, it's not retail, you don't really get anything from it. So yeah, this first boss is actually, I mean, it's not really hard. You just gotta kick on a rotation. It doesn't really cast that often anyways. You don't really have to be that on top of the kicks. But the main issue about it is that you will be running out of space. And you also need to be standing on these little platforms. And he will be casting a frontal that will be doing a 360 spin, so you're gonna have to be running around the room a lot. And over time you'll just be accumulating a lot of those area of denial effects on the ground that you are able to bait. You can put them down whenever you want, whenever you are targeted by them. But yeah, over time the room will be getting covered more and more and more, so you will be unable to really move around easily, because you will need to, but you won't really be able to if you don't play it properly. Now, there's also those effects coming off of the water that are splashing up, and if you're standing on the water whenever that happens, you're going to be knocked up, and you're also pretty much going to get one-shot whenever you're doing this on Tyrannical, so quite a claustrophobic fight, I would say. Not really a big fan of that, but it's really not too hard. You just really got to be able to know whenever the big burst of water is going to happen, and then you just are able to move freely and drop those, you know, area of denial zones, which I do believe they do a little bit of damage, but at least in this level we were able to stand in it for a couple seconds if we had to, but in a high key that might just be a one-shot, so yeah, this could really be a claustrophobic fight for us. As a Holy Paladin, I don't believe this is a good or a bad fight. I just believe, you know, there's nothing really too special about it for us. We're not really able to benefit too much from Latadon, but really, this build is not built around using Latadon. I'm sure there's gonna be some dungeons where you might be much more able to actually get a big benefit from Latadon, and you will be able to build around those scenarios, but in this case, that's not really what we're doing, so it doesn't really affect us too much if we're not able to be stacked up. Now we'll be skipping ahead here because there's just a bit of a run back, but we are now going towards the right side as you start. You can choose to go left or right, but of course you want to be going left first because, you know, you cannot really progress from that side. You gotta go back anyway, so yeah. Now here there's this couple ads. The first pack here is the most dangerous before the second boss, the RB, and they're gonna be applying a debuff that's going to be doing a lot of damage, and you're not really able to keep up with these debuffs. Unless you are really on point with the spells, you will always have a debuff running, as well as some other debuffs just going off. I believe you can have 2 at a time. Not sure if you can, it's actually something you can stun them up so you don't get him, but I do believe those are coming from those 2 guys, Yang and Shang. I think it's the 2 pandas. I'm not really sure, to be fair, but it does a lot of damage, and you should be able, or you should be really trying and aiming to keep up people with those debuffs. It's the main thing that I found that was actually dangerous of this first part of the dungeon. Everything else was just kind of whatever. You'll see there's going to be a little bit of AoE damage, but for the most part, it's all about getting past these 2 guys, and then you're able to get to the next boss quite easily, at least on this key level. But of course, this is fortified, so, you know, we're kind of figuring things out, so this is what I feel like was the most threatening so far. Now, we are playing with Blessing of Seasons, as I mentioned in the previous video, and to be fair, I haven't really been looking at what damage we've been getting out of it. It's not really the point. We're not really gonna be getting much damage out of Blessing of Summer or any other of the blessings unless we're really coordinating with our group, and that's not the case here. I'm just trying to use it on cooldown onto whoever I feel like it's doing the most damage. And I'm pretty sure over time, over the whole dungeon, it does add up to quite some damage. The rogue here was popping off quite a lot. Once again, I'm sorry for the video quality. I already mentioned this on the previous video, but I wasn't really able to record on much higher of a quality. I fixed that already now, but I already recorded these couple videos throughout the weekend, and Mythic Plus is over now when I'm recording this. It's already a Monday, so I'm not able to replay these dungeons, and believe me, it takes a little while to get a plus 15 going right when you're pogging. I wish I was able to, you know, have these runs go smoothly, but as I'm doing this with the time that I have and whenever, you know, the time and the hours that I'm playing these sort of things, I'm just not able to do it with other people. So really, it's quite kind of a miracle to just get a run to go smoothly and actually time it. But for this one, we did time it. I'm gonna spoil you. We did time this run, so it ends up being a little bit interesting, but yeah, it's quite hard to get a run to go properly here. Now here, this mob will be doing this territorial displacement cast or whatever, and it just does a lot of damage if you're standing in melee. Not too big of a deal, just don't stand in melee for a little while. It doesn't really last for too long. It doesn't do anything if you're not in melee, so it's not a big deal if you're not generating holy power for a little while. And then there's these other guys, you gotta interrupt some sort of enrage, and I do believe they do bleed. Yeah, as you can see there, there's a bleed that's being applied. You can bob that off, but once again, you're probably going to be a dwarf if you're going to be pushing high. Like after Season 4, I believe, everybody that's really going to go ham on Mythic Plus has learned that you need to be a dwarf if you really want to be going anywhere doing Mythic Plus. You don't really have to if you're just doing your weeklies, of course, or if you're just trying to get, I don't know, what's it called, Keystone Master or whatever, just get a mount. That's never really something you need, but if you're trying to get anywhere in the ladder or pushing or any shape or form, be competitive, you will kind of need to go to the biggest flavor of the month, and that's, for the most part, it's not really something that's changed. It's going to always be a dwarf. So yeah, big benefit from being a dwarf because you can remove the bleeds. Also, it's defensive, it gives you 10% reduced damage for a while, but regardless, you can always do just fine as a paladin with Bob and whatnot. But now we get into this boss, which I find that's not too interesting as it is right now, but it is quite a little bit of a healing challenge. I believe it will be quite a healing challenge, and it's just been buffed. Now the reason why I say that is, as you will see, it's going to be doing a lot of ticking damage. It just does a lot of ticking damage as you are fighting the boss. I believe there's ways of reducing this ticking damage a little bit if you play it right, but in any case, it's going to be doing a lot of damage, and this one, this kind of damage has just been buffed, so it will end up being quite a challenge. Not really much to add here. You will just see that I don't really struggle per se, you know, like this time around I was just fine. You could drop some healing to go ahead and be a little bit more offensive, but there was situations where you could feel that if you didn't really go start healing, you could kind of potentially fall behind. It's not the kind of healing profile that you are really scared about. It's just the kind of healing that feels like you need to it puts you on your toes. You need to be quick, you need to be agile with your healing, you need to know what you're doing, be very efficient with your rotation, and I think it's kind of fun. But, you know, could potentially be a scenario where you are just getting, you know, your healing is just not enough and you just feel like the water is getting up to your neck, you know what I mean? So, yeah, it really depends on what kind of key level you're doing this. And in this case, you could see that it's not too much, but it's starting to be at some points. It ramps up over time as well. As you get lower and lower, the bosses get lower and lower, they will end up doing a little bit more damage. And as the fight is just about to end, things get a little bit more spicy. Now let's just talk about Thundering for a second, just because why not? It's not really the most interesting affix. I've not really been having too much fun with it. Pretty much had no fun whatsoever with it. And the worst part about it is that they did make it so that whenever you have Thundering active in the key, which is pretty much gonna be always, the mobs have, I think it is 30% more HP, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but they have more HP. They don't do more damage, but they just have more HP. And that is because they want to offset the power we gain from Thundering. So whenever we are playing with Thundering, we should be using the power from Thundering. We should be trying to get the most out of the buff. If we do not, then we will just making the key harder. So that just makes it so that in cases where like you're playing with bugs and you're, for example, not spreading out or just trying to get rid of it as soon as possible, because, you know, it's something that you can easily forget about and then you're stunned and you will die. You will see that happening in a few minutes. But it's a little bit annoying and you don't really feel the power from the buff anyways. You just get it and then you're like thinking about, okay, I need to get rid of this or I'm gonna get stunned and I'm gonna die and I'm gonna take a lot of damage. And you will die if you get hit by this, you know, you actually proc the damage and the stun in a high key. I believe the damage will be scaling up in higher keys, but in any case, it's something that really puts you on edge. And if you're just doing this casually and chilling and doing it weekly, it's not fun, it doesn't feel like fun. I guess over time, as you get used to it, you will time your cooldowns or whatnot. You can see I have a timer for Thundering up there. so I know when it's coming, although I'm not really looking at it. But I also have this buff in the middle of my screen, as you can see, it's sticking down, and it's just making this whole feeling of you need to do this right now or you're gonna die. And yeah, there's people dying here, a lot of them. That's because this mob right here we're fighting right now, they do a frontal every now and then, and people just don't seem to notice. If you get hit by the frontal, you pretty much die. So yep, but thundering, not too fun. It's something you need to play around, it's forcing you to play around, otherwise the key is just harder overall, and it doesn't feel that great anyways, it doesn't feel that fun. I don't know, I think there's been many better affixes, you always had to play around them, but some of them were a little bit less annoying than this one. I don't know, I guess there's always going to be different opinions, and over time, as we always get used to things, we might see more upsides than downsides. Right now, I just don't see anything. I just feel like it's annoying and it's not really something that I want to have in the game, but whatever. It seems that's it's gonna be staying like this. There's little chance that they change anything at this point. Now, as we approach the third boss, we're gonna have a bit of an annoying trash here. They're gonna be doing a lot of AoE effects on the ground that you just need to be standing away from. That's thundering, but this one right here, the leg sweep, you can stun them, but they will just do it again, and you can have to be away from melee for a little while. As you can see, once again, it's gonna be doing it. So, annoying mobs that just need to be standing away from melee for a while, just like those mobs in the Knockwood Offensive, that other dungeon. But I've been trying to record the other dungeon, the Knockwood Offensive. That's one of the newer ones that we already talked about last video, but it really hasn't been going my way because it's so long. It's like a 40-minute long dungeon, and it's really hard to get a puck to just do it right. I'm also learning it as well. Like, there's a lot of things going on in these newer dungeons, but even actually for this dungeon, for being one of the older ones, actually the older one in the rotation, because this one's from Mist of Pandaria, right? So we have one from World of Draenor, one from Mist of Pandaria, and we have one from Legion, and yeah, this one is gonna be the oldest one. For a dungeon from that far behind, I think the mobs are actually quite, like, there's a lot of things going on. Like, mobs are quite complex, they all have quite a bit of things to themselves. They don't just stand there still and do some damage like a lot of the Legion dungeons. These have some kicks going through, they, you know, some stuff to look forward to, some frontals, some AoE effects on the ground, you know. So they seem like much more of an up-to-date dungeon. But still, it's not to the point where you just feel like you're overwhelmed. A lot of the packs are small, but of course you will end up pulling a lot. Whenever packs are small, you will just be forced to pull a lot of stuff. I do believe those balls that I just got hit by, they are something you gotta stay away from, and I just got hit by them. I got a debuff, which I don't really know what it's doing, but I can see it now on my screen. And yeah, those balls that you can see right there next to my character, I just got hit by them again. I just noticed that that's a mechanic that I should avoid. But yeah, there's a lot of things that you end up learning once you look back through all this, and over time you will just be learning about it, but it just feels alright to me. Once again, we have the frontal monster right here, the one standing in the middle of this room. He will be doing this thing, Flames of That, and as you can see, it's gonna be spewing a bunch of smoke, and it pretty much kills you if you're in front of it. Not really a big fan of this sort of frontals, where it's not really well... I don't want to say telegraph, because you can see what it's going to be doing, but you cannot really see the frontal, you know, you can't really see the effect clearly, especially when the mob is just moving around like that. It does seem like it's spreading it around. It might not be the case, but yeah. Anyways, it's kind of a slow part of the dungeon, a bit of a boring one. I think this was the most boring part of the dungeon. Most of the mobs didn't do much, a little bit of healing to be done here and there. This is kind of one of the parts of the dungeon that I believe you would just be pulling a lot of things with. But at the same time, we're taking a lot of damage here from this Molly's dying. I think that's what's doing the damage to us. So yeah, you could imagine that, you know, that's somebody dying to the frontal once again. But you could imagine that if you're taking a lot of AoE damages from this one mob, you wouldn't really be pulling it together with other things. And that's always boring when you're just fighting one single mob for a long time. Now, by the way, here we just took a little break, so I decided to just keep ahead. A little break for food buff and resting and whatnot, just for the sake of the video being a little bit shorter. But yeah, not once again, but here we're gonna be trying to do a little bit of a bigger pull. And I don't really know those hunting gazes, what those are doing. Those dark claws seem to just be doing a bunch of damage onto the tank. A lot of things that I still don't really know what they are doing, because I haven't really read through the abilities. But again, you will have to figure those out as we are doing the dungeons. Once Mythic Dungeon Tools is updated, you will be able to read those easily. And that's pretty much about it. You're just gonna be killing everything here, and it takes a little while. All the mobs look the same, there's a bunch of stuff in the ground, frontals and such. It just feels a little bit annoying. And the trash is really not too interesting, because there's a lot of smallies, you just AoE things down, I don't know. I guess you will just end up once again pulling everything at once. And I'm getting hit by those things in the ground a lot. Now that I'm looking back on it, it just seems really annoying. But here you will see something that's really what's gonna be happening a lot with Thundering, and that's a bunch of people getting stunned by the Thundering. That's why they're dying right there. They're all stunned, they're taking a lot of taking damage. And now one of them will be blowing up. I do also blow up, a bunch of stuff goes wrong, so we just end up wiping, and I completely cut that out of the picture because I don't want to be just having a bunch of running back in the video. But yeah, we pulled this once again, and if we were topped up, that would have been no problem, but we were not topped up because we screwed up with the Thundering. Something that seems to be pretty much going to kill you if the damage is going to be scaling with the key level, which I believe it will, not sure. It will pretty much kill you if you get stunned by the Thundering. So yeah, that's why it's such an unforgiving thing. You just feel like I need to get rid of this thing or I'm gonna be dying, you know? It's not just that you get stunned, it's that you are actually dead because you're not able to... I mean, if you can bubble it off, but other people would not really be able to get out of it, so... you're either dead to the damage or dead to a ground effect or to a frontal, whatever it is, it just feels too much for what you're getting out of it, which is not too much fun, but you are once again forced to play around it because otherwise the mobs have more HP, so you don't time the key. I don't really know. Here we are going to be pulling this boss, which I don't really like too much. I think it's quite an annoying boss for a Holy Paladin, but at the same time, it doesn't do that much damage overall. So there's going to be a bunch of things that are going to make you run out of melee. As you can see there, there's going to be a circle, and then there's some sort of waves that are going to be spawning. You need to stand outside of where those waves are going to be going, so just got to be mindful of where those are spawning. So after the Serpent Strike, you know there's going to be a Serpent Kick. Just look for those waves, and then you don't get hit, and that's about it. But at the same time, you're going to be playing around with these Thundering buff, which in this case was not too bad. Now there's also this Healing Absorb debuff that's being applied onto the tank. By the way, that guy just got hit by a frontal, or one of those waves. But the tank will be taking quite a little bit of damage. This Prot Warrior was struggling a little bit with this debuff. You can see there's a massive healing absorb onto him right now, so he needs to be healing up or dying, and I have to use Lay on Hands right there. He will be dying at some point soon as well, but yeah. The fight is not really, there's not really too much going on, it's just tank damage, and then there is these waves happening, so you just stand outside. If you are standing inside of the circle, by the way, when the waves are happening, you will also just get knocked back, so that's something you need to get outside of. Like, there's not just no choosing, you gotta do that. So a lot of going back and forth as a melee Holy Paladin. That is pretty boring, and once the whole room is covered with the waves, you are able to then just, you know, look at where the oldest one is, and that one will be disappearing, so you can stand in there. And once the boss is down to, I believe, might be 30%, it will transforming into a dragon. Yeah, there it is. And whenever the dragon form happens, I think that's when the fight is pretty much over. The tank just gets killed there because of the healing absorb. I didn't top him up in time, but we have a battle rest, so we are able to actually still go and not die because of the rogue just using evasion for a little while and rogue tanking. But there will be this frontal that the tank is pretty much able to move out of it, I believe, and then that's really about it. I don't think the boss does anything else once it's in this form. It is spawning those zones in the ground, so I guess it's a little bit of a DPS check, might be, not sure. It did die pretty quick on this difficulty, right on this key level, so it was not really something we could do much about. But maybe you have to bait those things outside. I guess you have to, because they're covering the room more and more over time. So yeah, that could potentially be what this phase of the fight is about. I didn't think about it in time before, but yeah, there we go. The boss just ends up dying, and at that point, it didn't really do too much for us healers. It was pretty much just kill it before it fills the room. But now we're gonna be running into the last boss room, and we have pretty much no mana. So this part of the fight is getting, or this part of the dungeon is where things are getting a little bit hectic. Now you can now respawn, and the door behind us, the one that was closed at the beginning of the dungeon, now that one should be open. So you can see that the priest is now getting closer to us more and more. So yeah, there we didn't clear Thundering, and as you can see, that pretty much meant that the Evoker was gonna die, but they also had a debuff that was being applied by these other guys. I don't really know what the channel on me was there, but yeah, it pretty much almost killed me. Probably something you can stun or kick, not sure. But yeah, a lot of those healing absorbs also on this pack. Not an easy one. This pack could potentially wipe you pretty easily because of Not really sure what the mobs are that the dangerous ones are really. But regardless, pretty dangerous pack. And once again, we have no mana here, pretty much. We have about 30%. And we have no time, so we're gonna go on to the last boss. Now, this last boss, I regret to announce, but it's a double dispel boss. It's another one of those scenarios where if you have a warlock that's able to dispel, this fight is completely negligible. You don't have to do anything. This fight becomes like pretty much no healing required. But if you don't have such a luxury, then you're gonna be needing to keep up with those debuffs. That's pretty much all the damage that's happening, and it does a lot of damage. So once again, we are back into Kultharok. This is pretty much Kultharok from Theater of Pain. Just gotta deal with the debuffs and the fight is free. But we also have this phase where there's the ads that are, you know, running towards us. I'm the last one to kill the Thunderings, so I don't need to clear that one. Because there's always going to be 5 Thunderings going off, so if you are the only one that's not able to clear it, you don't have to worry too much about it, but you have to kill these images of yourself. They didn't do too much damage, so I kind of was able to tank the images, but I do believe you will kind of have to just move around. Not sure if you could stun them, but if you are able to stack them up and just cleave them down, they didn't really last for too long. But regardless, that's like the dangerous part of the fight. Besides the double dispel, and if Warlocks ends up being meta once again, which, you know, there's always a chance that it does, here's one of the places where it will really shine because of this double dispel. Just imagine Kultharok once again. If you didn't have to deal with the double dispel, the fight was extremely easy. Well, that's just the case once more. Not too much to add to this fight. We're just gonna be killing it in time, close to the you know, marker of timing the key. Some way to put it, but yeah, that's really about it. I'll be joining you once the boss is dead, and we'll be talking about the details breakdown so we can see the damage, the healing and whatnot, and we'll be commenting as well on some of the stuff real quick. But yeah, see ya in a second. So as the boss is dying here, I might as well mention what I wanted to say before we get into the rush of talking about the details breakdown. And that is that we are running with the Gladiator's Insignia. That is one of the trinkets from PvP that gives us haste with a pretty high uptime, so we are able to get a lot of stats from that. Once again, one of those stat sticks that we like so much as Holy Paladins. It's also gonna be giving us, I do believe, is haste main stat, or it might be the other way around, I kind of forgot. But here is the damage breakdown. We have a lot of it from Glacial Fury as well as Consecration, but also we have Burning Embers that's coming from a trinket we're running that's gonna be on screen right now. And everything else just seems about normal. Now for the healing, we have more of the same as always, but Holy Light doing quite a little bit of healing without the splash healing, so maybe talenting into the splash healing talent could be interesting. A lot of it is just coming from consuming Divine Favor. We also have a big chunk of the healing from the Burning Ember trinket, and as you can see there, that's the uptime of the buff from Gladiator's Insignia. 41.7%, I'm sure it's not looking too great with the resolution of the video, but you know, it has a very high uptime, it gives us a lot of stats, so that's something that's pretty interesting. If you can get access to this trinket, it's always very good, especially at the beginning of the season. So yeah, that's pretty much for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.